Hi, my name is Jamie Young. I teach in Calcasieu Parish at W.W. Lewis Middle School. What you're about to see is my 8th grade English class engaged in Lesson 30 of the Guidebooks ELA curriculum. It's called Analyzing How Literary Devices Contribute to a Theme in Poetry. Because my classes are only 45 minutes long, I chose to split this lesson into 2 parts. So the first part includes the students using a jigsaw activity to paraphrase the poem and to talk about the central idea. And in the next class, we will discuss how literary devices contribute to that central idea. Before they jump into the jigsaw and the paraphrase, you will see that at the beginning of the lesson we discussed some background information about Phillis Wheatley Peters, who wrote the epigraph of this poem. We discussed what an epigraph is and what this epigraph might suggest about the theme of our poem before we even read it. The objectives of this lesson are that students will work together to paraphrase a poem and identify the central idea. Students will analyze the impact of literary devices on their central idea and its development. Students will support their claim by citing textual evidence that is relevant and sufficient. And students will use clear, efficient writing with correct grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Prior to this lesson, my students have just finished writing an essay where they analyzed the central idea of our main text, Sugar Changed the World by Mark Aronson and Marina Budos. So in this lesson, you'll hear me ask them to compare the central idea of Sugar Changed the World to the poem that we're reading today. Throughout this lesson, we've been working toward our culminating writing task, which will involve identifying the author's purpose and the techniques that authors use to convey their central ideas. I think this lesson really helps the students work toward that goal by allowing them to practice identifying central idea and analyzing the ways that authors convey their central ideas, but using an unfamiliar medium, like a poem. I think that if they can observe and analyze these things in a poem, it will make it much easier for them when they're doing it with their main text for our culminating writing task. This class contains a broad spectrum of learners, both high and low, as well as 2 ESL students. This is also my most talkative class. It is full of social butterflies, so they really enjoyed being able to move around and talk in different groups than they do every day. One of my biggest goals for this lesson was to really use the jigsaw as an opportunity to differentiate between different levels of students. While my groups are strategically created to make sure everyone feels supported and challenged, I took the jigsaw as an opportunity to do something different with my groups. For example, I do have 2 ESL students in this class, and I purposefully sit them at the same table so that they can support each other with instruction and anything that they don't understand. But for the jigsaw, they moved to tables on their own, and I think that presented a unique challenge to them that they don't get every day, and that at the end of class they were able to move back to their home group where they were together again. I'm about to read you the poem aloud, but before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about Phillis Wheatley, okay? She did not write this poem, but she did write our epigraph. Does anyone have an idea what an epigraph might be? What do we think? What do we think? Austin?
Like, say the word again, please.
An epigraph?
Epigraph. Graphing.
That's a good guess. Epigraph. But not quite. An epigraph is a quote that a poet might put at the beginning of their poem that will hint to the theme of the poem. Okay? And we know what theme means. We've talked about that a lot this year. Okay? So, the epigraph was written by Phillis Wheatley. And who that is she was born in 1750 in West Africa. She was brought to North America as a slave. Okay? She was enslaved by the Wheatley family as a young woman. At this time, it was illegal for slaves to learn to read and write, okay, because reading is power, all right? But despite that, the Wheatleys still allowed her to learn to read and write, and she eventually published a very famous book of poems called Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. And shortly after that, she was freed by the Wheatleys and married John Peters, and she died in poverty at age 31. She lived a very hard life. She was a very talented poet, okay? Our epigraph is a little excerpt from a poem she wrote called On Being Brought from Africa to America. And as we read it, try to think about why our author, why our poet may have chosen to put this quote at the beginning of the poem. Even though we haven't read the poem yet, what might it hint about the theme of the poem? Okay? Read with me, please. It says, "Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. All right. Anyone have an idea? Austin?
So when they see how they're colored, they look at them like it's diabolical. Like, why are they like that? And like Christians, Negroes, they all have like sin or whatever. And so when they're refined like sugar, it'll angelic train.
Refined blood sugar. That is a word we use when we talk about sugar. So that was a good catch. What does sable mean? Our sable race? Audrey?
Steady, stable.
Stable, different word. Sable, without the T. What, if we know about Phyllis Wheatley, what is her race? She's black. Sable means black, okay? Some of you are sable race with a scornful eye. Some of you are blackness with a scornful eye. What does scornful mean?
Like angry.
Like angry, mad.
Hateful, angry, ugly, okay? So some view our blackness in a hateful way. And then we have something in quotes. What does it mean if it's in quotes? Somebody that has not spoken, somebody that has not spoken. Miria.
It's a quote from like it's the paragraph. Something graph.
The whole thing is the epigraph. But if we're reading a poem and they have something that's in quotes, what does that probably mean, Austin?
I think it was said by somebody.
It was said by someone else, someone other than our narrator. Okay, so our narrator is black, we know this. Some of you are sable race with scornful eye. And then someone else says, their color is diabolic dye. Diabolic means what?
Like evil.
Evil, bad. Okay, so she's saying this is what they say about us. This is what they say about us. Our skin color is evil. Okay, is diabolic dye. Okay, but then she says, remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. What is the central idea of this epigraph, would you say? Somebody maybe that has not spoken as much. Casey, what would you say? Central idea of just this little quote. Okay, we know what race she was. We know she's black. She's a former slave. Okay, but what is she saying about that, Addie?
It's like sometimes people look at black different than they look at white.
And is that good or is that bad?
Well, she made it sound like it was bad
Right.
whenever she said diabolic dye.
Okay, Austin?
Like they see blacks as evil, but really like if you're Christian or you're black, you're all the same. You're all gonna be refined.
Okay, we're all going to be refined and join the angelic train. What's the angelic train?
Heaven.
Heaven. She's saying we all end up in the same place, you know? She's saying me, a white Christian, is no different than you, a black Christian, and we're all going to heaven. That's what she's saying. This is an anti-racist poem, okay? So knowing that, and knowing that it was written by a former slave, and that our poet chose to put this at the beginning of his poem, what do we think that some themes of our poem might be? What might we see? What topics? Someone? What topics might we see? Selena, what do you think? What topics might we see just based on this in our poem? Okay, maybe slavery. We know it's about the sugar industry, right? That's a pretty safe bet. Someone else? I have not spoken. All right, Addie?
Blacks getting treated differently.
Okay, racism, maybe. Riley, is that what you were going to say? Okay. Okay, so keep that in mind as we read. I'm going to read it to you, and then we are going to go to our jigsaw groups, okay? Remember the procedure for that, correct? Okay, wonderful. Here we go. Follow along, please. Go ahead. Go to your jigsaw groups. Quickly and quietly, please. Okay.
Yeah.
Was it Evelina? Who's Evelina? No.
Who worked for us? Who's us? Okay, so we have a narrator here, okay? And we have one day Evelina worked for us, showed up with her son Bubba and laughed. Now y'all can play together. He had a sweet nature, but even so, the narrator and who? The son, the narrator and Bubba, right? We raised a little Cain, okay? So who is she? Who is our narrator?
The daughter of the father?
The child of the master, okay? So she sees Evelina and her son very fondly, right? She wants to play with Bubba, you know? But then what happens?
Her dad thought that he sounded like this.
Right. So he says basically you can't hang out with him anymore. Why?
Because he's a slave.
Because he's black. Okay? What does raise a little Cain mean?
Black.
No, but that's a good observation. Cane, sugar cane, but not quite. Do we know? Who is Cain? Have you heard the name Cain? This is what we call an allusion. Okay? It is a reference to another story in our story. Cain is Adam and Eve's son in the Bible. And according to the Bible, he is humanity's first murderer. Okay? He killed his brother out of jealousy. So knowing that, what might it mean to say, we raised a little Cain? A criminal? I don't know. Maybe think on it. Think on it. Raised the little Cain. And look at the context, okay? He had a sweet nature, the little boy. But even so, we raised the little Cain, and Daddy told her not to bring him back. What does raised a little Cain mean? He's got into trouble. They got into mischief together. They raised a little Cain. Okay? Did he? What makes you think he might have died? Wait. One at a time. Pace and what? Sounds dramatic. Okay. What, Riley? Northbound train. What might that mean? Where's that train going? Up where? Could be heaven. Could be what else? Okay, so typically when we're talking about slavery, we talk about head north. What are we talking about? I'm a slave. Why might I want to go north? That's where the free states were. So it's talking about him going north for freedom. Now, if it's talking about him being dead, right, and a northbound train is going to heaven, is he still gaining freedom? Yes, in death, right? So I think our poet does that on purpose. It's both. You know what I'm saying? Because then he talks about climbed aboard a northbound train, black angels guiding him invisibly, angels taking him up in that northbound train to heaven. Okay? Right, the angels are guiding him up to heaven. Now, everybody please look at stanza 6 very quickly. Stanza 6. Look at the third line from the bottom. Can I have someone read that aloud for me, please, quickly? Addie, go.
My father died last fall at 81.
Next one.
Love's bitter, child, as often as it's sweet.
Love's bitter, child, as often as it is sweet. And we know from, who had stanza 2? You did. You had stanza 2? Someone, who else had stanza 2? Okay, and we know that love is also what?
Sugar.
According to this poem, sugar. Sugar is love. Okay, so love's bitter, child, as often as it is sweet, which means also, what else is bitter and sweet?
Her child.
Love and what else? What is love? According to this poem. Sugar. Okay? Sugar can be bitter and it can also be sweet, which sounds very similar to the central idea of what book we have read. Sugar changed the world. Sugar impacted the world in both positive and negative ways. We talked about that, right? This is very much the same thing. She's saying that love, much like sugar, can be sweet, but it can also be very bitter, okay, because of where it comes from. All right? Thank you so much. Good job today. Go ahead and pack up.
To ensure the objectives were met, I monitored student performance during the activity, and in the second half of the lesson, I also assigned a written exit ticket, where the students demonstrated their knowledge of the poem, their understanding of how literary devices conveyed the central idea, and gave textual evidence. After this lesson, we will be moving on to our culminating writing task and finishing up the unit. Thank you so much for watching my video.